The letter arrived on a Tuesday, sealed with the cold precision of a dead man's will. Alexander Ashworth, the 10th Duke of Kempton, read the solicitor's cramped script once, then let the paper drift onto his desk. His 28th birthday loomed 6 weeks away. If there was no Duchess by then, the entire Ashworth fortune, lands, mines, the London house, the ships, would pass to his odious cousin, a man who collected debts and mistresses with equal recklessness. "You have no choice, Your Grace," Mr. Prothero had murmured that morning, his spectacles catching the low firelight. "I have compiled a list of suitable candidates." Alexander had laughed once, a short, mirthless sound. Suitable meant wealthy enough to be respectable and desperate enough to accept him. His reputation preceded him, cold, arrogant, a man carved from winter stone. The ladies of the Ton whispered that he kept a ledger of emotions and never permitted an entry in the credit column. They were not wrong. He had learned early that attachments were liabilities, and he had no intention of paying that particular debt. The name Prothero circled was Miss Eleanor Gray, only daughter of Viscount Halstock. The Viscount's finances had been gutted by failed speculation. In exchange for the Duke settling every last pound, Halstock would deliver his daughter to the altar. The solicitor had hesitated, clearing his throat. "There is a matter, Your Grace. The young lady, her appearance is not what society considers fortunate. A fire in her childhood. Her face bears the marks." Alexander had looked up sharply. "Is she disfigured?" "The scars are significant, Your Grace. The left side from temple to jaw." He had waved a hand. "I am not marrying for a portrait gallery. Beauty fades, poverty does not." And so the contract was signed. Eleanor Gray would become the Duchess of Kempton, sight unseen. The wedding was set for a fortnight later at St. George's, Hanover Square. The Ton buzzed with the news. How delicious! The frigid Duke, forced to wed a woman the scandal sheets had dubbed the Scarred Sparrow. Bets were placed on whether he would even lift her veil. Some said he would marry her by proxy and stash her in the country forever. Others claimed he had been tricked, that the Viscount had hidden her from view until the last possible moment. Eleanor learned of her fate in the chilly drawing room of her father's Wiltshire house. Her father, a man whose once handsome face had collapsed into disappointment, delivered the news with his back half-turned. "He is a duke," Lord Halstock said, as though that excused everything. "He requires an heir. You will be a duchess. Count your blessings." Eleanor's hand drifted unconsciously to her left cheek, where the puckered skin pulled tight over her jawbone. She had been 8 years old when the nursery curtains caught fire. She had dragged her little sister, Margaret, through the flames, shoving her through the window before a burning beam swung down and grazed her face. Margaret lived, pink-cheeked and whole. Eleanor was given a mirror for her 10th birthday and learned to stop looking into it. Now at 24, she had long since accepted that her life would not include a husband who chose her freely. A marriage of convenience, then. She could endure that. What she could not endure was pity. So she straightened her spine in the carriage to London, arranged her heavy veil so it obscured every inch of her face, and resolved that no one, not the gossips, not the cold Duke, not the entire brittle assembly of the Ton, would see her cry. St. George was crowded. The faint scent of wilting lilies clung to the air. Alexander stood at the altar, tall and rigid in dark blue superfine, his cravat a flawless mathematical knot. His face was a mask of bored obligation. He did not fidget. He did not glance toward the doors. When the organ struck its first chord, he turned with the precision of a soldier presenting arms. Eleanor walked toward him on her father's arm. The veil was so dense that she could see only shadows beyond it, the shimmer of candlelight, the blur of pastel gowns, the dark pillar that was her future husband. Her hand in her father's was steady. Her heart hammered, but her carriage remained elegant, her head high. She heard the whispers, a susurrus of anticipation. Is it truly as terrible as they say? Poor man. Halstock should have warned him. She stopped before the Duke. Her father passed her hand to Alexander. His grip was cool, impersonal. The Archbishop's voice rolled through the ancient words. Eleanor made her responses clearly, her voice without tremor. Alexander's baritone answered each question with the same measured calm. The moment arrived. The archbishop intoned the final blessing. The congregation shifted, rustling like a flock of crows scenting carrion. Alexander turned to face his bride fully. His fingers, long and steady, lifted to the silver clasp that held her veil in place. He undid it. The lace began to slip. Eleanor did not lower her eyes. She lifted her chin a fraction and met her husband's gaze through the falling fabric. The veil dropped. A sound rippled through the church, not quite a gasp, not quite silence, but a suspension of all breath. Every eye fixed on the bride's left cheek, where the scars ran like a river map, pale and ridged from temple to the corner of her mouth. Her left eye, a warm hazel flecked with amber, stared out from the damaged terrain. Her right eye, deep brown and luminous, did not blink. Together they gave her face an unsettling, arresting asymmetry. Not beautiful, not grotesque, but startling, like a portrait painted by a master who refused to flatter. The entire church froze. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Alexander Ashworth looked at his wife. He looked at the scars. He looked at the mismatched eyes that held no plea for mercy, no shame, only a quiet, dignified challenge. I am here. What will you do? For a long, suspended heartbeat, he did nothing. Then his mouth curved, not into a smile but into something sharper, something private, something that did not reach the rest of his face. He raised her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Duchess," he said, loud enough for the front pews to hear, "shall we?" And the church exhaled. The silence broke in whispers that swept down the pews like wind through dry leaves. Lady Jersey raised her quizzing glass. A young buck near the back stifled a nervous laugh. The archbishop, visibly unsettled, hurried through the final prayers while the congregation stared openly at the new Duchess of Kempton's scarred profile. Eleanor felt every gaze like a dart, but she did not look away from her husband. Alexander's lips had pressed against her gloved knuckles with neither revulsion nor exaggerated gallantry, merely a statement of fact. She was his duchess. He had claimed her before all of London. She could not yet decide if this was an act of cold duty or something warmer. The man's eyes, a steady gray flecked with slate blue, revealed nothing. They walked back down the aisle, her hand resting in the crook of his arm. Near the doors, a cluster of young ladies tittered behind painted fans. Eleanor's steps did not falter. She had spent 16 years learning to walk through rooms filled with pity and fascination. The skill had been earned, stitch by stitch, every time she left the safety of Halstock Hall. Today, she wore it like armor. At the wedding breakfast in Kempton House, the ton descended upon long tables laden with crystal and silver. The Duke and Duchess were seated at the head, a table apart. Eleanor's plate remained untouched. Alexander cut his pheasant with surgical precision and said nothing. The silence between them was not quite hostile, more like a truce signed by two generals who had not yet decided whether to trust the ink. Then Lord Pemberton sauntered over. He was a man whose face suggested a life spent smiling at precisely the wrong moments. Months ago, he had courted Eleanor with tepid interest, drawn by her dowry. When he glimpsed her without a veil in the Halstock Gardens, his ardor had curdled on the spot. "Your Grace," Pemberton said, bowing to Alexander before turning a viper's smile on Eleanor. "I must confess I did not think you would go through with it, but here you are, and here she is, a triumph of obligation over optics." A few nearby guests pretended not to hear. Eleanor's hand tightened around her wine glass. Alexander set down his fork. The clink of silver against porcelain cut through the chatter. "Lord Pemberton," he said, his voice carrying with the kind of quiet that silences entire dining halls, "you have precisely 5 seconds to return to your seat before I have you removed." Pemberton's smile wavered. "I meant no offense, merely an observation." "Observations on my wife's appearance are not required. Your presence is. Leave this table." Pemberton retreated, his complexion blotchy. The diners resumed their conversations with the desperate brightness of people pretending nothing had occurred. Alina turned her head slightly, studying her husband's profile. He continued eating as though he had merely swatted a fly. That night in the echoing corridors of Kempton House, Alexander came to her door. She opened it to find him still fully dressed, a candle in one hand. His gaze traveled over her face with unnerving attention. She had removed her veil hours ago. The scars stood bare in the flickering light, pale and gleaming. "I trust your rooms are adequate," he said. "They are luxurious." Her voice was even, though I suspect luxury is a poor substitute for freedom. He did not flinch. "You are free within these walls. I will not impose upon your person. You will have a generous allowance, full authority over the household, and my protection in all things. I ask only that you act in the interests of the Kempton name, and produce an heir. When you are ready," the words were stiff, "if you are ever ready." Alina tilted her head, her mismatched eyes unreadable. "You speak of me as though I am a contract to be honored. I can live with that. I have lived with worse. But tell me plainly, Your Grace, will you ever wish to see my face by choice, or will I become a countess of the shadows, kept in the country while you chase perfect-cheeked mistresses in town?" Something flickered in his gray eyes. It was gone before she could name it. "I have no mistresses, I do not chase, and as for your face, I have seen ugliness. It wears lace and carries calling cards. It does not look like you." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Alina closed the door and leaned against it. She did not weep. She was far too confused for tears. Kempton's principal seat was Greywick Abbey, a sprawling limestone edifice in the Derbyshire hills. Mist coiled around its towers every morning, and the garden stretched for acres in a tangle of neglected roses. Alina arrived there 3 weeks after the wedding, and Alexander plunged himself into estate business with the fervor of a man escaping something. She rarely saw him before supper. She claimed the library as her territory. It was a cavernous room with a cracked dome skylight and bookshelves that smelled of old leather and damp. Here, Alina read Hume by a dusty window, her scarred cheek turned toward the light. The servants, at first skittish, warmed to her quiet courtesy. Mrs. Thistle, the housekeeper, confided that the previous duke had been a tyrant and that the young master had never learned to smile proper. Alina listened, asked few questions, and earned the woman's loyalty. One morning, a copy of a London scandal sheet arrived. It was titled The Town Crier, and its front page bore a crude caricature, a creature with a lopsided face, one eye comically large, the other squinting, wearing a duchess's coronet. The caption read, "The Beastly Duchess of Kempton." Alexander found the paper in the breakfast room, left by a careless footman. He read it in silence. Then he walked to the fireplace and hurled the entire tray of china, cups, pot, sugar bowl against the marble hearth. The crash brought 3 footmen running. His voice, when he spoke, was arctic. "Find every copy of this filth in the county. Buy them, burn them. I want the publisher's name." "Yes, Your Grace." Alina had entered through the side door and witnessed the destruction. She waited until the servants had scurried away before stepping over the shards. "You need not protect me from words," she said. "I have read far worse." "They will not print worse again." His jaw was rigid. "You cannot silence all of London." "I can silence enough." She did not argue. Instead, she asked, "How was your mother injured? In the fire, I mean." He went still. "What do you know of my mother?" "Nothing, that is why I ask." Alexander's gaze dropped to the broken porcelain. "She was not injured. She died when I was 10, fever." "Then you do not know what it is to carry a mark that people cannot ignore, to walk into a room and see every face do the same small flinch." Her voice was low, not accusatory. "I do not need your rage, Your Grace. I need you to stop treating me like a piece of damaged goods you must defend. I have defended myself for 16 years. I am still here." She left him standing amid the wreckage. That afternoon she received a letter. The seal was unfamiliar. The writing inside was Pemberton. Dear Miss Gray, for I cannot call you Duchess without irony, I write to offer an alternative. I have a small estate in Ireland. Come away with me. I can give you a life free of mockery, free of a husband who married you for coin. I was a fool in the church. I see now that true worth lies beneath the surface. Reply by post and I will arrange everything. Elinor folded the letter slowly. She did not throw it into the fire. She tucked it into the pocket of her gown and walked to the library where she sat and stared at the rain streaking the glass. Alexander found the letter 3 days later. He had not been searching. He had come to the library to ask Elinor's opinion on a tenant dispute, a gesture of trust he had been working up to all week. The paper had fallen from her book, and he recognized Pemberton's scrawl at once. He read it standing, his face turning to iron. When Elinor entered, he held up the letter. What is the meaning of this? She did not flush or stammer. It is a letter I received. I did not solicit it. And you kept it. You did not burn it or bring it to me. I have not decided what to do with it. Her eyes met his without evasion. I wish to think. That is still permitted me, is it not? His knuckles whitened around the paper. Pemberton is a scoundrel. He humiliated you in public. Now he offers an escape. You cannot seriously consider such a proposal. I consider all options presented to me, Elinor said. It is a habit learned from a life in which options were scarce, but I have no intention of dishonoring our vows. Her voice sharpened. Your suspicion, however, insults me. I have endured mockery, isolation, and a wedding that felt more like a funeral. I have not complained. I have asked for nothing but basic respect. Instead, you come here accusing me of plotting betrayal with a man whose very name curdles my stomach. Alexander stared at her. Then slowly he lowered the letter. You are right. She blinked. I apologize. The words came out like stones pulled from deep earth. I am unused to being wrong. Then learn, she said. I have. He did something entirely unexpected. He laughed, a short, rusty sound as though the mechanism had not been oiled in years. Elinor's lips twitched before she could stop them. The tension did not vanish, but it changed texture, becoming something less brittle. In the weeks that followed, Alexander began to court his own wife. It was an awkward, deliberate campaign. He invited her to ride with him across the estate, showing her the tenant cottages he was repairing, the drainage ditch he had redesigned. He asked her advice and listened to it, actually listened, his gray eyes narrowing in thought. Elinor remained guarded, but the frost began to melt. The harvest ball at Greywick Abbey marked a turning point. Local gentry filled the great hall, their faces curious when the Duke led his Duchess to the floor. The squire's wife, a woman named Mrs. Crabbe, peered at Elinor's scars and made a remark behind her fan, audible to anyone who cared to listen. How brave of him! I suppose one grows accustomed. Alexander's head turned. He fixed Mrs. Crabbe with a look that could freeze mercury. Then he extended his hand to Elinor. Dance with me. She hesitated. They are all starring. I am the Duke. I decide who is worthy of my arm, and you, madam, are supremely worthy. He said it without lowering his voice. Several guests heard. A murmur rippled, but it was not unkind. Elinor placed her hand in his, and he led her into a waltz. She was not an expert dancer. Her father had never paid for lessons, but Alexander guided her with sure, subtle pressure. The room spun around them. For the length of that dance, she forgot her face. She forgot the letter in her pocket, now crumpled and unread. She looked up at her husband, and his expression was not duty. It was something fiercer. The dance ended. Lady Honoria, a tall blonde whose cheekbones could cut glass, intercepted Elinor near the punch bowl. She was a woman who had angled for the Duke's hand before the will forced his choice. Her smile was a blade wrapped in silk. You dance charmingly, Your Grace. I imagine the Duke is relieved. One must take consolation in accomplishments when appearance cannot be the primary attraction. Elinor's heart contracted. I take consolation in many things, Lady Honoria. Kindness among them, do you? She walked away, but the barb lodged deep. That night she sat at her window, watching the moon bleach the gardens. Alexander had been attentive, yes, but what if Lady Honoria was correct? What if his courtship was merely a strategy, a way to make the best of a regrettable arrangement? She did not cry. She pressed her scarred hand against the cold glass and let the doubt settle into her bones. Alexander noticed the change. Eleanor was polite at breakfast, distant in the evenings. She answered his questions but volunteered nothing. The progress he thought they had made seemed to collapse inward, and he could not find the cause. A week after the ball, he found her in the garden near the old rose arbor. The day was overcast, and her blue cloak blended with the gray sky. She was sitting on a stone bench, her hands folded, her expression distant. He approached with a step that was, for him, hesitant. "Eleanor." She looked up. "Your Grace. I have displeased you, and I do not know how." She considered him for a long moment. "Lady Honoria spoke to me at the ball. She suggested you were managing your disappointment, that I was a duty you performed with admirable stoicism." His expression hardened. "And you believed her?" "I believe the evidence of 16 years, Eleanor said quietly. "I have never been desired. I have been tolerated, pitied, politely endured. It is not a great leap to assume my husband feels the same. You married me for your inheritance. You have been kind, far kinder than I expected. But kindness is not the same as wanting." Alexander dropped to one knee before her, a sight that would have sent the household into hysterics. He took her hand, and when she tried to pull away, he held fast. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice was raw in a way she had never heard. "I married you because the will required it. That is true. I expected to perform my duty and take no joy from it. I expected to be a husband on paper only. What I did not expect was you." His thumb traced her knuckles. "You, who carried a dying terrier half a mile to the house because a tenant's child was weeping. You, who reads philosophy by candlelight and argues with me about crop rotation. You who walked down that aisle with your head high while half of London waited for you to crumble." He drew a breath. "I look at you now, and I do not see your scars. I see a woman who fills every room she enters with something I have never possessed, courage without cruelty, dignity without pride. I am not managing my disappointment. I am terrified." Eleanor's lips parted. "Terrified of what?" "Of losing what I did not know I needed. I was a hollow man before you came. You have filled the hollow without trying, and I do not know if you will ever believe me." She pulled her hand away, but gently. "I want to believe you, but words are easy. Pemberton wrote me words. You speak them now. How do I trust that they will not evaporate when the next Lady Honoria appears?" Before he could answer, a footman came hurrying down the garden path. "Your Grace, a visitor, Lord Pemberton." Alexander rose. His face became something Eleanor had not seen before, not anger but a lethal calm. "Show him to the drawing-room, and send for the magistrate." Eleanor followed him back to the house. Pemberton was waiting, his cravat slightly askew, his eyes darting. He attempted a bow that turned into a stumble. "Kempton, I merely came to pay my respects, and to speak to the Duchess. I have concerns about her well-being." "Your concerns are noted and disregarded," Alexander said. "You will leave this estate now. If you ever contact my wife again, by letter or in person, I will destroy you with every legal and social weapon at my disposal." Pemberton's composure cracked. "She deserves better than a forced marriage to a cold fish who only wanted her fortune. Tell her, Eleanor. Tell her I offered you freedom." Eleanor stepped forward. Her voice was clear as a bell. "You offered me escape as one offers a cripple a crutch. I do not require your pity, Lord Pemberton. I do not require you at all. Leave and do not return." Pemberton gaped. The footman escorted him out. But in the aftermath, Eleanor turned to Alexander and asked the question that still festered. "Is there any truth to his claim? Do you plan to annul this marriage once the inheritance is secured?" The hesitation was a mere heartbeat, Alexander gathering his thoughts, choosing precision over passion. but Alina saw only the pause. She took a step back. "I see," she whispered. "Alina, I am going to London. My grey-tan has been asking for me. I think we both need time to decide what this marriage truly is." He did not stop her. He stood in the great hall and watched her carriage disappear down the drive, and the absence that settled over Greywick Abbey was colder than any Derbyshire winter. London in early spring was a study in grey. Grey skis, grey stone, grey judgments whispered behind fans. Alina settled into her grey-tants townhouse on a quiet Marylebone street. Lady Marcham was a formidable widow of 72 who played whist with cutthroat precision and had long declared the ton a menagerie of painted fools. She asked no prying questions, merely installed Alina in a bright bedroom and forbade any mention of that foolish Pemberton creature. Invitations arrived. The curious wanted a closer look at the beastly Duchess. Alina accepted a select few, knowing that hiding would only feed the gossip. She attended a musicale in a gown of copper silk, the color deliberately chosen. She would not dress as though in mourning for her own face. The other guests murmured, but several ladies found themselves disarmed by her composure. A young baroness, shy and pockmarked herself, whispered that Alina's example gave her courage. 2 weeks passed. Alina walked in Hyde Park with Lady Marcham, nodding the fashionable carriages and the riders on their gleaming horses. She saw Alexander only once near the Serpentine. He was on horseback speaking to a politician, and he looked terrible, gaunt, shadowed beneath the eyes, his mouth a hard line. Their gazes met across the distance. He inclined his head. She inclined hers. Then he rode on, and Alina felt the encounter like a splinter beneath her skin. Pemberton, despite his banishment, made one last attempt. He cornered her at a ball hosted by Lord and Lady Whitmore, stepping from behind a column in the corridor as she returned from the retiring room. "Alina, please, listen. I know I was clumsy, but my feelings are genuine. Come with me. You will never be mocked again. I have a house in Hampshire, quite secluded." "Lord Pemberton," her voice cut like a blade. "You saw me once without my veil and fled as though I had leprosy. You courted my dowry, not my person. You insulted me at my own wedding breakfast. And now you imagine I will fall into your arms because you dangle a promise of seclusion. I do not want seclusion. I want a man who looks at me as though I am the whole world, not a defect to be hidden. You are not that man. You never were. Stand aside." He did, his mouth slack. Alina swept past him, her heart hammering but her steps steady. She realized with a clarity that felt like dawn breaking that she had just defended her marriage to a man she had walked away from. The contradiction would have been laughable if it were not so achingly true. The Whitmore ball that night held its final act. Alina stood on the terrace, breathing cool air, when a familiar presence materialized at her elbow. Alexander. His evening clothes were immaculate, but his eyes were those of a man who had not slept properly in weeks. "I have been a fool," he said. Alina did not turn. "Which particular foolishness do you mean?" "All of it, every hesitation, every silence when you needed words." He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the darkened garden. "You asked if there was truth to Pemberton's claim. There is none. I have never considered annulment, not from the moment I lifted your veil. What I considered, what I feared, was that you would want your freedom, that I had trapped you in a marriage you did not choose, and that my growing feelings were a further burden." He turned to face her fully. "I am not a man given to declarations. I was raised in a house where emotion was weakness. I have been a poor student of love, but you have taught me, Alina. You have taught me that strength and softness can coexist, that scars are not stories of damage but of survival, and that my fortune means nothing if I cannot share it with you." His voice dropped. "I will shout it from the rooftops if that is what it takes. I will tell all of London that I am the unworthy one, that my wife is the finest person I have ever known, and that I will spend the rest of my life earning the right to stand beside her." Alina's eyes glistened. "Words are still easy, Alexander." "Then let me show you." He offered his hand. She took it. He led her back into the ballroom, and the crowd parted in confusion as the Duke of Kempton walked to the center of the floor with his scarred Duchess. He raised her hand high, turning slowly so that all could see. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying to the farthest corner, "I have an announcement. My wife's face is my country's finest map, showing only courage and grace. Anyone who shames her shames me. Anyone who mocks her mocks my lineage. I will not have it. She is the Duchess of Kempton, and I am the most fortunate man in this room." The silence was absolute. Then from the back someone clapped, Lady Marcham, her old hands meeting with sharp, decisive cracks. Another joined, and another. Within moments the applause swelled, driven as much by shock as admiration. Lady Honoria turned away, her expression sour. The scandal sheets would feast, but they could no longer wound. Eleanor looked up at her husband. He was breathing hard, his composure cracked open, and beneath it she saw the truth she had doubted for so long. She saw a man who was terrified and hopeful and completely, irreversibly hers. "I see it now," she said quietly. He squeezed her hand. "Take me home." They returned to Greywick Abbey as summer burnished the hills green and gold. The London scandal sheets did their worst for a month, then tired of the story. The Tun's approval, so fickle and conditional, ceased to matter. What grew in its place was quieter and more enduring, a deep, companionable love that filled the empty rooms of the Abbey with laughter and debate. Alexander commissioned a portrait of Eleanor. He insisted on Mr. Turner, an artist known for refusing to flatter his subjects. The painting captured her seated in the library, a book open on her lap, her scarred left profile turned frankly toward the viewer. Her mismatched eyes gazed out with calm directness. The portrait took 6 weeks, and when it was finished, Alexander had it hung in the Great Hall, directly across from the portrait of his own severe grandfather. "Are you quite certain?" Eleanor asked, studying the canvas. "It is not a face designed to please." "It is a face designed to endure," he replied. "Every future Duke of Kempton will walk past this portrait. They will see a woman who saved her sister, who withstood cruelty with grace, who married a man unworthy of her and made him worthy. That is the legacy I want for our line. Not flawless complexions, substance." Lord Pemberton, disgraced by gambling debts and social ostracism, fled to the continent. The scandal sheets mentioned his departure in a footnote, already bored with his name. Lady Honoria married a baronet of little consequence and was seldom seen in town. Life, Eleanor reflected, had a satisfying habit of evening the scales without her needing to lift a finger. Spring returned. In the private quarters of the Abbey, Eleanor sat before her dressing table, her reflection still a thing she met with ambivalence. Alexander came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. In the mirror, their gazes met. "I have something to tell you," she said. His hand stilled. "What is it?" She took his wrist and guided his palm to the gentle swell of her stomach, barely visible beneath the muslin of her morning gown. "Our heir has begun its first heartbeat. The physician confirmed it this morning." For a long moment, Alexander did not speak. His gray eyes, so often guarded, filled with a light she had never seen. He knelt beside her chair and pressed his forehead to her hand. "I told you once that I was hollow," he said, his voice thick. "You have filled that hollow with a life I never dared imagine. You and this child, and every morning I wake beside you." He lifted his head. "The best things in my life arrived when I stopped looking at surfaces." Eleanor leaned down and kissed him, not on the cheek, but on the mouth, with the confident tenderness of a woman who had learned her own worth. The scars did not disappear. They never would. But they had become part of a larger story, a map of a journey she had taken from fire to this moment, from solitude to a love that asked no apologies and offered no conditions. That evening they walked together in the garden where he had once knelt before her. The roses were blooming at last, coaxed back to life by a new gardener. The sun sank low, turning the limestone of the Abbey to honey gold. "I used to think my face was a punishment," Eleanor said, "but now I see it was a filter. It repelled those who valued the wrong things. Pemberton, Lady Honoria, even the old version of you if you will forgive me. Entirely forgivable, Alexander murmured. It left behind only what was real. She squeezed his arm. That is not a curse. It is a strange and unexpected gift. He stopped walking and turned her to face him. The sunset caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines that her laughter, had begun to carve around his eyes. "I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret that gift," he said. "And our son or daughter will grow up knowing that beauty has nothing to do with surfaces." "Our daughter," Elinor said, her smile curving. "I rather think it will be a daughter. She will have your stubbornness and my refusal to be pitied." "Then heaven help her suitors." They laughed together, the sound carrying over the darkening gardens, and the abbey behind them glowed with candlelight. Inside, the portrait of the scarred Duchess watched over the great hall in serene silence, a permanent declaration that the Duke of Kempton had been warned his bride was ugly, and had found instead the most beautiful reality he could never have predicted.